If more of our institutions are to be servant-led, so that that becomes the norm rather than the exception, as it now seems to be, then there will need to be a cultural change that establishes servant leaders as the norm and clearly labels non-servants in key positions as unwholesome deviants. And that will take a bit of doing.
That was Robert Greenleaf, who is credited as the founder of the servant leadership movement. He believed that the best leaders are those who prioritize serving others and focusing on the well-being and growth of their team members. Thank you for choosing to listen to this episode of Breakout Room, the podcast that offers diverse perspectives and encourages the exchange of ideas and viewpoints outside of mainstream discourse. It's where we dream, inspire, and rethink leadership. I am your host, Dr. Nicole, and today we are exploring the ideal of servant leadership. It is a foundational philosophy for me as an aspiring leader. So I want to start off by talking about what servant leadership is and why we should care. It's my hope that this first podcast will set the tone for how serving first can create a more adaptive and engaging environment. So please like, subscribe, rate and review, and share this podcast with aspiring leaders, managers, and anyone hungry for a more inclusive people first approach to leadership. So let's start with the question. What is servant leadership and how did it come to be? Servant leadership is a leadership philosophy where the leader's main goal is to serve others, putting the needs of employees, customers, and communities first. The desire is first to serve with a focus on helping others be more successful, healthier, and wiser. The idea was first introduced in an essay titled The Servant as Leader, and it was written by Robert K. Greenleaf in 1970. This was coming off the heels of tumultuous times of the post-World War era. And in this essay, he explored the concept of a leader who puts serving others first. And although servant leadership is now widely recognized philosophy, what is the context that surrounded the emergence of this viewpoint? And it was deeply rooted in the societal shifts and challenges of the 1960s and 1970s. Greenleaf was profoundly influenced by the social unrest and institutional failures he witnessed during this turbulent period. Amidst this backdrop of social and institutional upheaval, Greenleaf was also influenced by literature. He read Hermann Hesse's Journey to the East. It was an allegorical novel that told the story of a group of travelers that were on a search, where a servant named Leo, who was not just a menial worker, but he was the heart and soul of the journey. And so Leo was ultimately revealed to be the leader of the group that actually sponsored the trip. And so this idea of the leader as servant resonated deeply with Greenleaf. And as a lifelong student of organizations, Greenleaf observed firsthand, like at AT&T, how established institutions were struggling to meet the needs of those they were actually meant to serve. He specifically noted the turmoil on university campuses. He saw that faculty were not always doing or acting as servants for their students. Many were focused on their own work and research, and they really were neglecting their roles as educators and mentors. This contributed to a feeling of being disconnected, and it really fueled the student unrest that was sweeping the nation. Students felt they were being used just to support faculty who were not prioritizing their needs. Servant leadership wasn't just for individuals either, it was also for organizations. He believed that institutions could be servant leaders too. He stated that caring for persons, the more able and the less able serving together, is the rock upon which a good society is built. And so Greenleaf observed that much of the caring that happens in our world is mediated through institutions. He also noted that these institutions are often large, complex, and sometimes just ineffective or even corrupt. He believed that to build a better society, we needed to raise the capacity and performance of our major institutions to serve. Greenleaf saw a need for a cultural shift that established servant leaders as the norm and identified non-servant leaders as unwholesome deviants, quote unquote. He felt that theological seminaries could play a key role in bringing about this cultural shift. He also believed that seminaries had the potential to lead in sort of conceptualizing this shift and inspiring a compelling vision that could be communicated to churches and schools. So Robert Greenleaf's vision of servant leadership was a radical one that challenged traditional notions of power and authority. He believed that a good society is built on the principle of caring for people. Now, you might be asking yourself, why in 2025 would I be talking about a leadership concept that was first introduced over 50 years ago? Like, is it still relevant today? And I think that it is. His work continues to offer a powerful framework for building more just and compassionate people, institutions, and communities. And in the 1960s and the early 1970s, it was a period that was just had profound social upheaval. Like, imagine a time when the very fabric of society was being challenged and reshaped. The civil rights movement was demanding fundamental human dignity. Anti-war protests erupted nationwide. Young people were rejecting the stable middle-class lives their parents had known. And this was an era that was marked by political assassinations, widespread social unrest, protests against racism and war, and a countercultural movement that kind of questioned every existing norm. The youth of the time weren't just complaining, though, they were actually taking action. They protested everything from the Vietnam War to systemic inequalities. They championed rights for marginalized communities, including LGBTQ. And remarkably, out of this turbulent period came some significant environmental legislation like the Cleaner Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. Authority was no longer automatically trusted, and people demanded accountability, transparency, and genuine service. Does that sound familiar? I mean, today we're facing similar challenges: social tensions, political divisions, systemic inequalities, police brutality, and racism. They just echo, from the past, and just resonate so strongly. So, in an age where many people are very self interested, they don't seem to be too interested in serving their fellow man, the core principles of servant leadership really are relevant. We're experiencing some of the same issues that plagued society in the 60s and 70s. In addition, we had a global pandemic, and people even protested that. The response to the pandemic, and the list just goes on. We have witnessed a surge of social movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, ignited by the murder of George Floyd, which sparked global protests against systemic racism and police brutality. This movement amplified calls for racial justice, highlighting issues like mass incarceration and the need for police reform. At the same time, the climate crisis had intensified. Youth-led climate movements demanded urgent action and gained significant traction. These movements emphasized the interconnectedness of climate change with social justice, recognizing that the marginalized communities often bear the brunt of environmental degradation. The COVID-19 pandemic further amplified existing social and economic inequalities. It exposed vulnerabilities in the healthcare systems and exacerbated disparities in access to resources and essential services. The pandemic also highlighted the importance of global cooperation and the interconnectedness of human health and the planetary health. And social media played a crucial role in all these movements. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook have facilitated rapid mobilization, amplified voices, and spread information globally. However, social media also presents challenges, such as the spread of misinformation and the potential for echo chambers that limit exposure to diverse perspectives. The 2020s have been a period of both profound challenges and unprecedented opportunities for social and environmental change. These movements, fueled by a growing sense of urgency, empowered by technology, they're really shaping the course of the 21st century. So moving forward, it is crucial to address how these issues are connected. Building a more just and equitable society requires a comprehensive approach that tackles systemic racism, addresses the climate crisis, and ensures that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. The success of these movements will depend on continued activism, effective collaboration, and a commitment to building a more just and sustainable future for all. Now, this podcast is definitely about leadership, and I chose to start with servant leadership because it's a philosophy of leadership that personally resonates with me. It wasn't until I started my doctorate degree that servant leadership was even on my radar. Early in my program, I was asked the reason why I was pursuing a doctorate degree, and I thought long and hard about what I wanted to achieve, and what was the whole goal of everything I wanted to do. And in that exploration, I ran across servant leadership, and it just kind of what came to the surface. And so for me, servant leadership wasn't just like this academic concept. I have always tried to do what I can to serve others. Like when I graduated from high school, I joined the Army. In the Army, I learned to do my part to serve the greater good. As a universal blood donor, I try to make it a point to donate blood every time I can. I truly am a servant first. Servant leadership flips the traditional leadership model, and instead instead of having leaders who demand service, we have leaders who serve first. And it really is about prioritizing the needs of others, empowering team members, building community, demonstrating genuine empathy. So in a world where media can inflame tensions or calm them, servant leaders choose to be bridge builders. They understand that true leadership isn't about personal power, but about lifting others up. So as we navigate our current complex social landscape, the principles of servant leadership are more crucial than ever. We must ask ourselves, how can we serve, and how can we create positive change? The lessons from history remind us that transformation begins with the individual commitment. One person committed to serving others can spark monumental change. And organizations can also embody servant leadership and contribute to a more just and equitable society. For Greenleaf, a true servant leader begins with a natural feeling to serve. This is distinct from a leader who is primarily motivated by power or material gain. The servant leader prioritizes the needs of others. Greenleaf proposed a challenging test for this. Do those being served grow as people? Do they become healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous, and more likely to become servants themselves? He also asked, what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? These are some questions we can ask ourselves. And I want to challenge you to give them some thought, whether you are the selected leader or the servant as leader or anywhere in between. How will you shape the lives of others? Remember, you don't have to be the one at the top or out front to lead people towards a more just and compassionate world. Just have to make a decision within yourself to do so. So in future episodes, we're going to explore some of the key components of servant leadership. And I want to encourage you to consider how can adopt servant leadership principles in your own life and in your communities. I want to leave you with this final thought. Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, verses 43 and 44, and this is the easy to read version. He said, "But it should not be that way with you. Whoever wants to be your leader must also be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must serve the rest of you like a slave." Thanks for listening to this inaugural episode of Breakout Room. Be sure to rate and review this podcast so others can find and enjoy this content on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Until next time.